These are the notes for Wednesday, April 15th. Remember that you need to already have either this graph memorized or this chart memorized or one of these two charts. I'm going to be going off this one today. Tangent of 30 degrees. So we know 30 degrees is in the first quadrant. So 30 degrees would just be like right there. And in the first quadrant, they're all positive. So we know our answer is going to be positive. And tangent, remember tangent is sine over cosine or y over x. So at 30 degrees, y is 1/2 and x is the square root of 3 over 2. When you multiply by or divide by a fraction, it's the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So we can multiply by the reciprocal of the square root of 3 over 2, which is 2 over the square root of 3. Then the 2's would cancel, leaving us with 1 over the square root of 3. And from here, we just have to rationalize the denominator by multiplying by the square root of 3. And that gives us the square root of 3 over 3 as the exact value of the tangent of 30 degrees. So next is sine of pi over 4. That's also in the first quadrant. Right there, pi over 4 is at 45 degrees. So if we go over here and we say sine of 45 degrees, this one in the middle is 45, sine goes second. Our answer is just the square root of 2 over 2. Okay, tangent of 60 degrees. Again, 60 degrees is in the first quadrant, right here. It's positive, they're all positive. And tangent is sine over cosine. Remember, sine goes second, so that's the square root of 3 over 2 divided by 1/2. And when we divide by a fraction, it's the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 1/2 is 2 over 1. The 2's cancel, and we're just left with the square root of 3. Okay, this is cosecant of pi halves. Remember, it goes 0, and this is pi, so this is pi halves. So we are right here on our y-axis. So we're looking at this point right here, 0, 1. And cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. Okay, sine, it goes second, so sine here is 1. And the reciprocal, 1 over 1, is just 1. Okay, cosine of 135. So if we were to graph this, we were to rotate 90 degrees and then another 45 degrees to get us to 135 degrees. Remember, this is our reference angle formed by the terminal side and our x-axis. So our reference angle is 45 degrees. Since our reference angle is 45 degrees, we are going to look at the square root of 2 over 2, square root of 2 over 2, because that is our 45 degrees. We also need to say we are in the second quadrant. So in the second quadrant, only sine is positive, which means the cosine is negative. So our answer will be negative. And the cosine goes first. So which one goes first here is square root of 2 over 2. Okay, next is 5 pi over 6. So let's think about where 5 pi over 6 is. We know that 6 pi over 6 is 1 whole pi. So it's just shy, or pi over 6 shy, which means, remember, pi over 6 represents a 30-degree reference angle. So our reference angle is 30 degrees. Okay, since our reference angle is 30 degrees, we're going to be looking at this point. Now, we need to say cosine, is it positive or negative? In the second quadrant, as we saw in the last problem, the only one that's positive is sine. So cosine and tangent are negative in the second quadrant. So our answer is going to be negative. And we're referencing our 30-degree reference angle. And the cosine here, because sine goes second, so cosine is the first. So it would be negative square root of 3 over 2. Okay, next is cosine of 240. So if we were to graph this, that's 180. And we would go a total of 60 more degrees to get to 240. Okay, remember that our reference angle is this angle right here. So our reference angle here is 60 degrees, which means we're looking at this point because that's our 60-degree reference angle point. And we have to decide, is the cosine positive or negative in the third quadrant, because we're in the third quadrant. And since tangent is the only one that's positive in the third quadrant, that means cosine must be negative. And cosine, remember, it goes sine second, so cosine is first, is 1/2. Okay, next, tangent of 3 pi over 2. So remember, if we're rotating, this would be 1 full pi, so it goes half pi, whole pi, and then 3 pi over 2, or pi and a half, would put us right here on the x-axis. So we're looking at this point right here, 0, -1. Remember, tangent is sine over cosine. So here, that would be sine goes second, so that's -1 over 0, which is undefined. Okay, secant of 300. So let's sketch this. 300 degrees, that would be 90, 180, 270, and we go another 30 degrees to get to 300. That does not mean that our reference angle is 30 degrees. Remember, our reference angle is formed by the terminal side of our angle and the x-axis. So this is our reference angle. If we went 30, this whole thing's 90, we have 60 degrees left to go. So our reference angle is 60 degrees. And we have to decide if the secant is positive or negative in the fourth quadrant. And in order for us to do that, we need to remember that the secant is the reciprocal of the cosine. And in the fourth quadrant, the cosine is positive. So that means that our secant is going to be positive. Okay, so if our secant is positive, next thing we need to look at is our point. We have a 60-degree reference angle, so we're going to be looking at this point. The cosine is 1/2. And the secant is the reciprocal of the cosine, or 1 over 1/2, which would give us 1 times the reciprocal of 1/2, which is just 2. Okay, so let me make a note really fast. Next is cosecant of 7 pi over 4. So we have to decide where 7 pi over 4 is. We do a little sketch. We know that 8 pi over 4 is just 2 pi. So 7 pi over 4, that's 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, 6 pi over 4, 7 pi over 4. So it is pi over 4 shy of a full 2 pi. And this is our reference angle. Remember that pi over 4 is 45 degrees, so our reference angle is 45 degrees. And we have to determine if the cosecant is positive or negative in the fourth quadrant. The cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, and in the fourth quadrant, only cosine is positive, which means the sine is negative. And the sine of, we're looking at square root of 2 over 2, square root of 2 over 2, because 45 degrees is our reference angle. Sine goes second. So that's -1 divided by sine, which is the square root of 2 over 2. So then we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. So that's 1 times 2, -2 over the square root of 2, which is just -2 over the square root of 2. Which is just equal to -2 over the square root of 2. And then we have to rationalize the denominator by multiplying the numerator and denominator by the square root of 2. And that gives us -2 square root of 2 over 2. The 2's cross out, and our answer is just negative square root of 2. Okay, next is cosine of 360. So if we were to do a full 360-degree rotation, that puts us at this point, 1, 0. And the cosine goes first, sine goes second, so our answer is just 1. Tangent of 135. Okay, so we know 135 is, that's a 90, another 45 degrees. Our reference angle here is 45 degrees. And we have to look at this point. The tangent in the second quadrant is going to be negative because only sine is positive in the second quadrant. So our answer is negative. And remember that tangent is sine over cosine. Since we're looking at a 45-degree reference angle, we're looking at this point. So that's going to be the square root of 2 over 2 divided by the square root of 2 over 2. All right, and that just gives us -1. Okay, let me move this down a little bit because it's kind of hard for me to write. Hopefully I won't mess this up. Okay. So cosine of 270, so that's going to be right here on our y-axis. So we're looking at this point right here. Cosine is first, sine is second, so our answer is 0. Tangent of 2 pi, that is going to be a full rotation. So we're looking at this point right here, 1, 0. Tangent is sine over cosine. Sine goes second, so that's 0 over 1, which is 0. Okay, this is tangent of 25 pi over 6. Remember, since there's a 6 in the denominator, we know our reference angle is going to be 30 degrees, but still we need to figure out which quadrant this is in. The way I look at it is I look at this as if we divided 25 can go into 6 a full 4 times. So that would be a full 4 pi. So we can do this as, watch, this is 6 pi. Use a different color. Let's extend. Okay, so this would be 6 pi, 12 pi, 18 pi, 24 pi, which means we only have one more pi over 6 to go to get to 25 pi. Our reference angle is, again, we said we already knew it was 30 degrees, and in the first quadrant, everything's positive. Since our reference angle is 30 degrees, we're looking at this point, and the coordinates, remember, tangent is sine over cosine, so that's 1/2 over the square root of 3 over 2, which would just give us 1/2 times the reciprocal of the square root of 3 over 2, which is 2 over the square root of 3. These cancel. That's 1 over the square root of 3, which after we rationalize our denominator is the square root of 3 over 3. Cotangent of negative 60 degrees. So let's look at this. Remember, when our angle is negative, we're rotating clockwise. So it's a 60-degree rotation right here. Our reference angle is 60 degrees. And cotangent in the fourth quadrant, we know cotangent's the reciprocal of tangent, and only cosine is positive in the fourth quadrant. So that means that cotangent is negative in the fourth quadrant. Our 60-degree reference angle, we're going to be using this as our reference angle because it's 60 degrees. And remember, tangent is sine over cosine, which would be square root of 3 over 2 over 1/2. But cotangent is the reciprocal of that. So cotangent is actually cosine over sine. So cotangent would be 1/2 divided by the square root of 3 over 2. And then we would multiply by reciprocal, so that's negative 1/2 times 2 over the square root of 3. And then the 2's would cancel, and that would give us negative 1 over the square root of 3. And then we'd have to rationalize the denominator and multiply the numerator and denominator by the square root of 3 over square root of 3, which gives us negative square root of 3 over 3. Okay, next we have sine of 405. So we're going to go ahead and draw a sketch. That would be 360, and then we'd go another 45 degrees. We're in the first quadrant. Our reference angle is 45 degrees, and the sine goes second, so our answer is just the square root of 2 over 2. Tangent of 13 pi over 4. Okay, remember 4 pi over 4 is 1 full pi, so we can rotate this and say 4 pi over 4, 8 pi over 4, 12 pi over 4, and then we go pi over 4 more, and that puts us with a, right here, 45-degree reference angle. Tangent in the third quadrant is positive, and our 45-degree reference angle, so tangent is sine over cosine, and square root of 2 over 2 divided by square root of 2 over 2 is just going to give us 1. Okay, let's look at sine of negative 660. So let's rotate this a full 360 degrees, but we're not going to go that way because it's negative. My bad. And negative angles rotate counterclockwise. I'm sorry, negative angles rotate clockwise. So that's 360 degrees. And then if we go 360 degrees, if we added a positive 360, that'd give us 300. So we have another 300 degrees to go. So that's 90. That would be 180. That would be 270. And we rotate another 30 degrees to get us to our full negative 660. Now, our reference angle is not 30 degrees. It is this angle right here, which is 60 degrees. Okay, everything's positive in the first quadrant, so we know our answer is positive. And we're looking at our 60 degree reference angle. Sine goes second, so our answer is square root of 3 over 2. Finally, let's do 7 pi over 2, or negative 7 pi over 2. I'll try not to forget that when we have a negative angle, we rotate clockwise. So we know this is pi halves. So this is 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, 4 pi over 2, 5 pi over 2, 6 pi over 2, 7 pi over 2. So that puts us right here at this point, 0, 1. And we know cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent. Tangent is sine over cosine. So cotangent is cosine over sine, which is 0 over 1, and that just gives us 0. Okay, so this is going to be your homework, but I think that instead of giving you all of these, you're welcome to do all of these. I will be happy with you guys just doing the, let's do the odd problems, okay? You still need to know how to rotate, do number 24, but I guess I'm just going to assign the odd problems. Let me make sure I like what I see here. Yeah, okay, I'm okay with y'all just doing the odd problems for homework, okay? If you have any questions, guys, please let me know.